What they discovered that day would launch one of the most perplexing investigations in California desert history. 4 people were found in a shallow ravine 37 miles from the nearest town, but there should have been 5. The group had set out 3 weeks earlier for what was supposed to be a routine 3-day hiking tour. None of them knew each other before booking the trip. None of them would return. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We're really curious where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a rating. Emily Carter was 29 years old in early March 2017. She worked as a freelance graphic designer from her apartment in Portland, operating mostly through remote contracts. Her Instagram feed showed a woman in love with landscape photography. 12,000 followers watched her document sunset hikes and mountain vistas across the Pacific Northwest. Friends later described her as restless, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her sister Rachel was 5 years older and worked in IT security in Seattle. The two talked weekly, usually about ordinary things, work frustrations, weekend plans, their mother's persistent questions about grandchildren. On March 7, 2017, Rachel received what would become the last communication from her sister. A photograph of a desert sunset, the sky burning orange and purple above jagged rock formations. The message read simply, "This is it." The timestamp showed 6:22 p.m. The GPS coordinates embedded in the photo placed Emily 15 miles off the planned route. Jason Lee, 32, lived in a studio apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. He worked remotely as a software developer, spending most days in front of 3 monitors, communicating with colleagues he'd never met in person. His online presence suggested someone comfortable in digital spaces, but uncomfortable in physical ones. He posted frequently on astronomy forums, sharing long-exposure photographs of star fields taken from remote locations. His mother told investigators her son had been talking about wanting to disconnect for several months. He'd mentioned a hiking trip in passing during their weekly phone call, but provided few details. She wasn't worried. Jason often took solo camping trips. Except this time, he wasn't alone. Marcus Riley taught physical education at a Phoenix middle school. At 27, he was the youngest member of the hiking group. Students remembered him as energetic and encouraging, the teacher who organized weekend rock climbing trips and ran the school's outdoor adventure club. His social media showed someone who seemed genuinely happy. Photos of mountain summits, river rapids, desert trails. His colleagues were puzzled when he requested personal days in early March. Marcus typically saved his vacation time for summer expeditions. He told the principal he needed to take care of something personal and would be back by March 9th. The school marked him absent without further explanation on March 10th. By March 11th, they contacted police. Sarah Collins worked intensive care at a San Francisco hospital. She was 31, recently transferred from emergency medicine after what her supervisor delicately termed compassionate fatigue. She'd worked through the previous year's flu season with minimal breaks, covering shifts for colleagues, staying late to monitor critical patients. By January 2017, Sarah was showing signs of burnout. Her apartment lease showed she'd been looking to sublet starting in April. She'd told her roommate she needed to figure some things out and might travel for a few months. The hiking trip was supposed to be a starting point, a few days of silence and perspective. The 5th person in the group was David Holmes, 28 years old, certified wilderness guide, resident of Barstow, California. He'd been leading desert tours for 4 years, accumulating positive reviews and repeat clients. His website featured photos of smiling hikers against dramatic canyon backdrops. testimonials praising his knowledge and professionalism. His parents lived in a retirement community outside San Diego. They described their son as responsible, safety-conscious, someone who always called after completing a tour. When David didn't call by March 9th, his father filed a missing persons report. The officer taking the report noted it as unusual. David Holmes had never missed a check-in before. The tour had been organized through a Facebook group dedicated to alternative spirituality and wilderness experiences. David posted the offer in mid-February, a 3-day trek through remote Mojave canyons, significantly discounted for a small group willing to travel off-season. 4 people responded within a week. Security camera footage from a Barstow gas station captured the group's last confirmed sighting. March 6, 6:43 a.m. 5 people loading gear into a dark green Jeep Cherokee. The video quality was grainy, but body language appeared relaxed. David gestured toward a map spread across the hood while the others listened. Someone laughed. They looked like any group of hikers starting an adventure. The planned route would take them through Afton Canyon, a scenic area popular with experienced hikers. Day 1, establish base camp near the canyon entrance. Day 2, explore side trails and photograph rock formations. Day 3, return to Barstow by evening. Simple, straightforward, routine. But the group never reached Afton Canyon. Family members began calling within 24 hours. Sarah's roommate contacted police on March 8th when Sarah didn't answer repeated calls. Jason's mother called Seattle police on March 9th. Rachel Carter filed a missing persons report on March 10th. Marcus Riley's principal reached Phoenix authorities the same day. David Holmes's father had already reported him missing on March 9th. By March 11th, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office coordinated with local search and rescue teams. They deployed helicopters and ground crews across a 100-square-mile search zone centered on the group's last known coordinates. The Mojave is unforgiving territory, temperatures exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit by midday, dropping to 40 degrees after sunset. Dehydration can set in within hours. Disorientation follows quickly. Search teams found nothing for 2 weeks. No tire tracks, no abandoned equipment, no sign of the Jeep. The desert seemed to have swallowed 5 people completely. Then, on March 28th, 3 graduate students stumbled upon something that changed everything. The ravine was approximately 8 feet deep, carved by ancient water flows that hadn't run in decades. 4 people were discovered there, positioned in what investigators initially described as unusual arrangements. Personal belongings were scattered across a 200-meter radius. Backpacks, water bottles, 1 sleeping bag. The Jeep was never found. The condition of the scene raised immediate questions. This wasn't a typical scenario of lost hikers succumbing to the elements. The location itself defied logic. Why would experienced outdoor enthusiasts, led by a professional guide, end up so far off course? Why were their belongings dispersed rather than consolidated? Where was the 5th person? Detective Thomas Veranos of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene within hours. At 42, he'd spent 7 years working cases involving missing persons in desert regions. He'd seen heat exhaustion victims, lost tourists, the occasional homicide dumped in remote locations. This case fit none of those patterns. The first oddity was the location itself. The ravine sat in a section of desert that required deliberate navigation to reach. No marked trails led there. No scenic features would attract casual hikers. Someone would need GPS coordinates or prior knowledge to find this specific spot. The second oddity was timing. Based on preliminary assessments, the timeline suggested events had occurred around March 7th, the same day Emily sent that sunset photograph. But the location didn't match the photo's embedded coordinates. They were miles apart. The third oddity emerged during the initial evidence collection. Among the scattered belongings, investigators found something that made no sense. A sleeping bag carefully folded and placed on a flat rock as if someone had packed it deliberately rather than abandoning it in distress. Detective Veranos stood at the edge of the ravine as the sun dropped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. Something about this scene felt staged. Not the people themselves, but the arrangement of objects around them, like someone had tried to tell a story. But what story? And where was the fifth person? The families arrived over the following days. Rachel Carter flew in from Seattle, her face composed but her hands trembling as she signed identification paperwork. Marcus Riley's parents drove up from Phoenix, his mother unable to enter the medical examiner's office. Jason Lee's mother came alone. His father had passed away 2 years earlier. Sarah Collins' roommate made the identification. Sarah's own family was estranged, living somewhere on the East Coast. David Holmes's parents arrived from San Diego. His father, a retired aerospace engineer, asked detailed questions about the scene. Where exactly were they found? What was the terrain like? How far from the planned route? His mother sat silently, clutching a photograph of David in his hiking gear, smiling at the camera. David always came back, she kept repeating. He always came back. But this time, David Holmes didn't come back. At least, not yet. 5 days after the discovery, a search team using metal detectors found something buried 30 centimeters beneath the sand, approximately 10 kilometers from the ravine. A waterproof Ziploc bag containing a smartphone. The phone was an iPhone 7, still holding a 67% charge. The lock screen displayed a familiar wallpaper, a photograph of the Portland skyline at dusk. The discovery seemed to offer a break in the case. Perhaps Emily had hidden her phone before something happened. Perhaps there would be messages, photos, some record of what went wrong. Technicians carefully transported the device to the county forensics lab. But before they could analyze it, 3 more phones turned up. March 30th, Jason Lee's Samsung Galaxy, buried in similar fashion 8 kilometers from the first location. April 1st, Marcus Riley's iPhone, 6 kilometers from Jason's. April 3rd, Sarah Collins' phone, another 11 kilometers away. All in waterproof bags, all buried at roughly the same depth, all still holding substantial battery charges. Detective Veranos spread a map across his desk and marked each location with a pin. 4 phones, 4 different sites, distances ranging from 6 to 11 kilometers apart. The pattern formed no recognizable shape, no straight line, no circle, no clear geometry. But they all shared one characteristic. Each phone had been buried approximately 12 hours before Emily sent her last text message. The internal timestamps didn't lie. Whoever buried these phones did so the night of March 6th, possibly early morning March 7th. Yet Emily's message was sent at 6:22 p.m. on March 7th. Jason's fitness tracker registered movement until 10:14 p.m. that same night. The phones were buried before the group arrived at the ravine, before events unfolded, before whatever happened. Someone had planned this in advance. The 5th phone, David Holmes's device, remained missing. But it was about to make its presence known in a way that would transform this case from tragedy into something far more disturbing. April 26, 2017, 29 days after the bodies were discovered. Rachel Carter was sorting through her sister's mail at Emily's apartment when her phone buzzed. A text message. The sender ID made her drop the stack of envelopes. The message came from Emily's number. Rachel stared at the screen. Her hands went cold. The message contained GPS coordinates and a single sentence: "The sun rises forever." She called Detective Veranos immediately. While they spoke, similar messages arrived on 3 other phones: Jason Lee's mother in Seattle, Marcus Riley's father in Phoenix, Sarah Collins's former roommate in San Francisco. All identical, all from the phones of the deceased, all sent simultaneously at 3:47 p.m. Pacific Time. The phones were in evidence lockup, sealed in clear plastic bags, logged and cataloged. They sat on metal shelves in the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Evidence Facility, behind locked doors requiring keycard access. They could not physically send messages. Yet, somehow, they had. The forensic team worked through the night. Lead technician Amanda Reeves discovered the mechanism within hours. Each phone contained an application called Shadow Text, software designed for encrypted messaging with delayed sending capabilities. Users could compose messages months in advance, set specific dates and times, configure them to send automatically even if the device was powered off or in airplane mode, as long as battery remained. The application was hidden in a subfolder marked System Utilities on each device. Someone had installed it deliberately, configured it carefully, then concealed it where casual users wouldn't notice. The messages sent on April 26th had been programmed weeks earlier, likely before the hiking trip began. Detective Veranos obtained warrants to analyze the complete digital history of all 4 recovered phones. What emerged painted a picture that contradicted the initial assumption of a simple hiking tragedy. The conversations were between Emily and David Holmes. They'd been communicating privately long before David posted his tour offer on Facebook. The tone suggested familiarity, shared understanding of something unspoken. Emily wrote, "Is this really what happens?" David replied, "Only if you're ready, only if you truly understand what you're seeking." Rachel read these exchanges in Chen's office, her face growing paler with each screen. "My sister didn't know this man. She never mentioned him. Why would she lie about that?" Chen pulled up another recovered file, a document titled The Passage Protocol, saved on Emily's phone 3 weeks before the trip. The file outlined something described as a voluntary transition ceremony involving multiple participants, conducted at specific geographic coordinates, timed to sunrise on predetermined dates. The language was abstract, almost poetic. References to energy release and permanent witness and liberation from material anchoring. The document never explicitly stated what would occur, but the implications were clear enough to make Rachel physically ill. Jason Lee's phone yielded similar findings. Browser history showed months of research into alternative spirituality groups, forums discussing transcendence through physical dissolution, websites for organizations that existed in legal gray zones between religious movements and something darker. One forum in particular appeared repeatedly: Desert Luminescence. The site featured testimonials from people claiming to have experienced consciousness expansion through multi-day wilderness retreats. The language was carefully calibrated. Nothing overtly dangerous, nothing that would trigger law enforcement scrutiny. But between the lines, a different message emerged. Marcus Riley's phone contained fewer deleted messages, but more recent activity. 2 days before the hiking trip, Marcus had downloaded the same shadow text application found on the other devices. His calendar showed an entry from March 7th, sunrise ceremony, final preparation. The most disturbing evidence came from Sarah Collins's device. Her phone contained a video file, partially corrupted but partially recoverable. Forensic specialists spent days reconstructing fragments. What they recovered showed approximately 40 minutes of shaky footage shot in near darkness with occasional flashlight illumination. The video appeared to be from the night of March 7th based on metadata timestamps. 5 people sat in a circle on desert ground. Their faces were difficult to distinguish in the poor lighting, but body positions and clothing matched the descriptions of the missing group. David Holmes's voice was audible, speaking words that sounded ritualistic, references to solar cycles, energy transference, voluntary passage. At one point, all 5 individuals drank from a single container passed around the circle. The liquid inside was not visible, but the act itself was clearly coordinated. Everyone knew what to do. Everyone participated without hesitation. 40 minutes into the video, 4 people gradually stopped moving. David Holmes rose to his feet, checked each person methodically, then looked directly at the camera. The transition is complete. I remain to bear witness. The video cut off, but there was something else. A shadow visible in the frame's edge during those final seconds. A 6th person standing behind the camera. Someone else had been present. Someone who recorded this ceremony. Someone who was never accounted for. Detective Veranos assembled a task force. The case shifted from mysterious tragedy to potential homicide, though the legal classification remained complicated. If the participants had acted voluntarily, if they'd understood and accepted the consequences, then traditional definitions of murder didn't cleanly apply. But facilitation of suicide carried criminal penalties. Concealing deaths was criminal. And there remained the question of that 6th person. The investigation expanded to David Holmes' background. Officers searched his Barstow apartment, a modest 1-bedroom unit near the desert's edge. What they found suggested a life divided between public persona and private obsession. The public David Holmes existed in the front rooms. Hiking certifications on the wall. Professional equipment neatly organized. Bookshelves holding wilderness survival guides, first aid manuals, local geology references. A laptop containing client correspondence, tour schedules, accounting records. Everything legitimate and ordinary. The private David Holmes emerged in the bedroom. A second laptop, password protected, eventually cracked by forensic specialists. This computer contained extensive files related to a group calling itself the Synod of Eternal Sun. Membership rosters, ceremony protocols, philosophical documents outlining beliefs about consciousness, mortality, and desert landscapes as sacred transition spaces. The Synod had been founded in Nevada in 2011 by an individual using the name Helios, no legal identity ever confirmed. The organization existed in a legal twilight zone, registered as a religious educational nonprofit, carefully avoiding explicit advocacy of anything illegal. Their public materials discussed spiritual enlightenment, connection with natural environments, personal transformation through wilderness experiences. Their private materials, recovered from David's computer, told a different story. Instructions for identifying potential participants. people experiencing life crises, searching for meaning, dissatisfied with conventional existence. Methods for gradual introduction to more intense philosophical concepts. Protocols for ceremonies conducted in remote locations away from potential intervention. David Holmes had been a member for at least 4 years. Chat logs showed regular communication with someone identified only as Helios. The most recent exchange occurred on March 2, 2017, 5 days before the hiking trip. Helios. The convergence is prepared. Solar Guide. 4 have committed. All understand the path. And you remain clear on your role? Solar Guide. I am the witness. I hold the light. I hold the light. Helios. Then proceed. The sun will welcome them. Detective Veranos brought these findings to Dr. Alice Fraser, a consultant who specialized in fringe religious movements. She reviewed the materials over 3 days, then delivered her assessment in a conference room at the sheriff's office. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The difficult truth is that some people, in states of profound crisis or existential despair, genuinely seek what this group offers. They're not coerced in the traditional sense. They're offered an answer to a question they've been asking themselves, and sometimes they say yes. Rachel Carter attended that briefing. She listened to Dr. Fraser's explanation, then spoke quietly. My sister was sad. She'd broken up with her boyfriend. Her design work wasn't fulfilling her anymore. But she wasn't suicidal. She loved life. She just wanted it to mean more. Dr. Fraser nodded sympathetically. That's often the profile. Not people who want to die, but people who want to live differently, who want to feel something profound. The Synod offers that feeling. They frame it as transcendence rather than death, liberation rather than ending. For someone in the right psychological state, that narrative can be extremely compelling. But Emily hadn't mentioned any of this to Rachel. Neither had Jason told his mother, Marcus told his colleagues, or Sarah told her roommate. They'd kept these communications secret, this preparation hidden. Why? The answer lay in the ceremony protocols recovered from David's laptop. Participants were instructed to maintain absolute secrecy regarding their intentions. Contact with the Synod, preparation for ceremonies, philosophical discussions, all conducted through encrypted channels, never shared with people outside the group. The rationale provided was that outsiders cannot understand the path until they walk it themselves. In practical terms, this secrecy prevented intervention. Family members couldn't raise alarms about concerning behavior if they didn't know the behavior existed. Law enforcement couldn't investigate an organization if participants never mentioned it. The Synod operated below the threshold of visibility, protected by the silence of its own members. Detective Veranos tracked down David Holmes's former girlfriend, a woman named Jennifer Marsh, who dated him briefly in 2015. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Barstow, sitting across from the detective with her arms crossed defensively. I dated David for 4 months, she said. In the beginning, he seemed normal, passionate about hiking, knowledgeable about the desert. Then he took a trip to Nevada for a weekend. When he came back, he was different, started talking about higher purposes and serving solar consciousness. I thought maybe he'd done too many drugs at some festival, but it never went away. He got more and more intense about it. I ended things in December 2015. Did he ever mention the Synod? Veranos asked. Jennifer shook her head. Not by name, but he talked about a group he'd met, people who understood the truth about existence. He wanted me to come to a gathering. I refused. That's when he got angry, said I was too anchored to material concerns to ever achieve liberation. I left his apartment and never went back. She stared at her coffee cup. I saw the news about what happened, about those hikers. I kept thinking, if I'd reported something back in 2015, would those people still be alive? Varanos had no answer for that. The investigation focused increasingly on finding David Holmes. Despite the body discovered in February 2018, identified through documents found nearby, doubts remained. The remains were severely degraded by desert conditions and scavenger activity. DNA testing showed a 91% match to samples from David's apartment. High probability, but not absolute certainty. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Michael Torres reviewed the case file and noted inconsistencies. The degradation pattern doesn't quite match the timeline, he told Detective Varanos. If this individual expired in March 2017, we should see more advanced skeletal articulation given the environment. This looks more consistent with someone who died later, possibly months later. Could the documents have been planted? Varanos asked. Absolutely, Torres replied. In fact, given their condition relative to the remains, I'd say it's likely. The leather wallet shows less weathering than the biological material. That's backwards. The driver's license might have been deliberately placed to create a false conclusion, to make investigators believe David Holmes was deceased, to close the case and stop looking. The messages from all 5 phones continued at irregular intervals. May 15, 2017, another set of coordinates, same cryptic phrase. July 3rd, different coordinates. September 28th, November 12th, January 6, 2018. Each time, GPS locations scattered across the Mojave Desert, never repeating, never forming obvious patterns. Rachel Carter plotted every coordinate on a detailed map. She spent hours analyzing the positions, looking for meaning. Were they marking locations significant to the synod? Were they pointing towards something hidden? Or were they simply meant to confuse, to keep investigators chasing ghosts across empty desert? Marcus Chen, the forensic specialist, offered a technical perspective. The messages are definitely automated, sent through the shadow text application, but they require cellular signal to transmit. That means either the phones are moving, or they're positioned where signal sporadically reaches them. Ridgelines, elevated areas. Someone is maintaining this system. The case attracted attention from federal authorities. FBI agents joined the investigation in March 2018, bringing resources for surveillance and digital tracking. They focused on tracing the synod's network, identifying other members, mapping the organization's structure. The FBI identified approximately 40 individuals with confirmed connections to the synod across Nevada, California, and Arizona. Most were ordinary people: teachers, nurses, retail workers, office administrators. They attended occasional gatherings, participated in online discussions, but showed no indication of planning or participating in ceremonies like the one that killed Emily, Jason, Marcus, and Sarah. Then, in October 2023, 6 years after the original incident, something changed. A message arrived from Emily Carter's phone. Not the usual coordinates and cryptic phrase. This time, the text was different. The cycle opens again. Those who seek the eternal light may still find passage. The witness remains. The message included a link to an encrypted website. Federal agents traced it to servers in Iceland, masked behind multiple layers of proxy routing. The site contained an application form. Questions about personal philosophy, spiritual seeking, willingness to embrace ultimate transformation. A final question. Do you understand that some journeys have no return and accept this as liberation rather than loss? The FBI established a sting operation. An undercover agent posing as a seeker experiencing existential crisis filled out the application. Within a week, responses arrived. Communications directing the agent toward preparatory materials. Instructions to attend an introductory gathering in the desert outside Las Vegas. The operation escalated carefully. The undercover agent attended multiple gatherings over 4 months, gradually gaining trust, being introduced to more restricted materials, eventually being invited to what was described as a convergence ceremony scheduled for May 2024. The ceremony location, coordinates in the Nevada desert, 40 miles from any maintained road. Participants were instructed to arrive on May 11th, prepare for a 3-day experience, and bring willingness to transcend material attachment. Federal agents coordinated with Nevada law enforcement. Surveillance teams positioned in the desert days in advance, using long-range equipment to monitor the site without detection. On May 11th, vehicles began arriving. Over 12 hours, 13 people gathered at the remote location. At 2:30 a.m. on May 12th, law enforcement moved in. 13 individuals were detained without incident. Among them, David Holmes. He was 35 years old now. His appearance significantly changed from photographs taken in 2017. Longer hair, substantial beard, skin deeply tanned from desert exposure. But fingerprint identification confirmed his identity within minutes. In the vehicles, officers found ceremonial items, documentation about the synod's beliefs, and 5 smartphones in waterproof cases. Technicians examined the devices. 4 were the original phones recovered in 2017: Emily's, Jason's, Marcus's, Sarah's. They'd been removed from evidence storage at some point through means still under investigation. The 5th phone was David Holmes's device, the one that had never been physically recovered, the one sending messages for 7 years. David Holmes refused to speak without an attorney. The 12 other individuals detained were eventually released after questioning, charged with trespassing on federal land, given citations, allowed to leave. None appeared to understand that the ceremony they'd been preparing for would have resulted in their deaths. They believed they were attending a spiritual retreat. Detective Veranos, now 49 years old and preparing for retirement, traveled to Nevada for the interrogation. He sat across from David Holmes in a federal facility, a lawyer present, recording equipment active. "You've been alive this entire time," Veranos said. It wasn't a question. David's expression remained calm. "I never died. 4 people are dead because of you. 4 people chose transcendence. I honored their choice. You facilitated their deaths." David shook his head slowly. "I witnessed their passage. There's a difference. They asked for guidance. I provided it. Everything was voluntary. Everything was understood." His attorney interjected. "My client maintains that all participants in the March 2017 event acted with full knowledge and consent. No coercion occurred. No force was used." Veranos leaned forward. "Tell me about the 6th person. Someone filmed that ceremony. Someone helped you." For the first time, David's composure flickered, just briefly. "There is no 6th person. I set the camera myself." The shadow in the video. Someone was standing behind the camera. A trick of the light. The phones buried 12 hours before the ceremony. You couldn't have buried all 4 in different locations and returned in time. Someone helped you. David said nothing. A concept, not a person. I've read your communications. Helios gave you instructions. Helios coordinated ceremonies. Helios recruited members. Helios is the solar consciousness we all serve, the eternal light. Helios is a human being, someone who started this organization, someone who's still running it, someone who convinced you to kill 4 people. The interrogation continued for hours, yielding little additional information. David Holmes maintained consistent responses, admitting to facilitating the March 2017 ceremony, but insisting that all participants understood and accepted the outcome. His attorney argued that prosecuting the case would be legally complex. How do you prove murder when the deceased arguably participated willingly? Rachel Carter sat in the federal prosecutor's office in Las Vegas, her hands folded on the table. 7 years had passed since her sister's death. 7 years of unanswered questions, disrupted sleep, relationships that failed because she couldn't let go of what happened in that desert. The case is complicated, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park explained. We can charge Holmes with concealing deaths, improper disposal of human remains, fraud related to the tour arrangement, but proving he murdered anyone becomes difficult when evidence suggests the participants knowingly consumed the substance that caused their deaths. They didn't know they would die, Rachel said quietly. Actually, the recovered documents indicate they did. The Passage Protocol file explicitly describes the ceremony's outcome. Your sister downloaded and read that file 3 weeks before the trip. Rachel's voice remained steady. My sister was vulnerable. She was searching for meaning. Someone exploited that vulnerability. I agree, Park said, but exploitation isn't always prosecutable as murder. The law distinguishes between forcing someone to die and providing them means to die when they've requested it. Holmes' defense will argue this falls into the latter category. Then we prove it doesn't, Rachel replied. We prove he manipulated them. We prove they didn't truly understand. We prove someone else was involved, someone who's still out there recruiting new victims. That someone was the key, the person behind the camera in Sarah Collins' video, the person coordinating the synod's activities, the person using the name Helios. Marcus Chen, working independently from the federal investigation, continued analyzing the digital evidence. The recovered phones contained thousands of files, and he'd spent years methodically examining every fragment of data. In November 2024, he found something that had been overlooked. The shadow text application used to send automated messages required initial configuration through a master device. Someone had to program the messages, set the coordinates, establish the sending schedule. That master device left digital fingerprints, metadata identifying its unique hardware identifier. Chen traced that identifier through cell tower records and internet service provider logs. The master device connected to networks across Nevada, California, and Arizona between 2016 and 2024. But one connection point appeared repeatedly, a location in rural Nevada near the town of Tonopah. He brought this information to Detective Veranos, who had officially retired but maintained close involvement in the case. Together, they presented the findings to the FBI. Federal agents obtained warrants and organized a tactical approach to the property, an isolated compound consisting of 3 structures surrounded by desert scrubland. The raid occurred on December 3, 2024. Agents expected potential resistance, but the compound was nearly empty. 2 individuals were present, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Monroe and a man in his 60s named Gerald Voss. Both claimed to be caretakers maintaining the property for an owner they'd never met. Rent payments arrived electronically. Instructions came through encrypted messages. They'd never seen the actual owner face to face. But the compound's main building told a different story. Inside, investigators found the infrastructure of the synod's operation: server equipment routing the encrypted website, filing cabinets containing membership records, ceremony protocols, and philosophical documents, a studio space with video editing equipment and green screens, the setup used to create online content for recruitment purposes. Most significantly, they found the master phone, the device used to configure all the automated messages sent from the 5 phones over 7 years. It sat on a desk connected to a charging cable, its screen dark. Forensic analysis revealed something that cracked the case open. The master phone's user account was linked to an email address. That email account had been used to register domain names, make purchases, and communicate with Synod members. The registration information for the email traced back to a real identity. Not a mystical figure named Helios. Not some shadowy cult leader operating beyond reach. The email belonged to Jennifer Marsh, David Holmes's ex-girlfriend from 2015, the woman who claimed she'd left him because of his involvement with the Synod, the woman who told Detective Veranos she'd never been part of the group, the woman who had been sitting across from law enforcement in 2017, expressing regret and concern while actively coordinating the entire operation. Federal agents located Jennifer Marsh in Reno, Nevada, where she worked as a database administrator for a healthcare company. She was 43 years old, lived alone in a modest apartment, and maintained the appearance of an ordinary life. Co-workers described her as quiet, competent, and unremarkable. Her arrest occurred without incident. During the search of her apartment, agents found additional equipment: backup servers, encrypted hard drives, and a second master phone. They also found something unexpected: a journal, handwritten, documenting the Synod's activities from its inception. Jennifer Marsh hadn't joined the Synod. She'd created it. The journal entries dated back to 2009. Jennifer described a personal crisis following the death of her younger brother in a car accident. She'd struggled with questions about mortality, meaning, and the arbitrary nature of loss. Traditional grief counseling hadn't helped. Religious frameworks felt hollow. She'd begun researching alternative perspectives on death, eventually becoming fascinated with voluntaristic philosophies that framed mortality as a choice rather than an imposition. By 2011, she developed a coherent belief system and began sharing it online through forums and blogs. She attracted followers, people experiencing similar crises, similar questions, similar searches for frameworks that made death feel less like tragedy and more like transition. The Synod emerged from these discussions, initially as a loose network of people exploring ideas together. But somewhere between 2013 and 2015, the philosophy evolved from theoretical discussion to practical application. Jennifer began organizing ceremonies, small gatherings in the desert where participants would engage in intensive experiences designed to prepare them for ultimate transition. Most of these ceremonies were symbolic, rituals that simulated the concept without actual harm. Then in 2014, 2 members of the Synod, A couple in their 60s facing terminal cancer diagnoses asked Jennifer if they could conduct a final ceremony as a way to end their lives on their own terms rather than through prolonged medical decline. Jennifer agreed to facilitate. She coordinated the location, provided guidance, and ensured their wishes were carried out. The couple's deaths were discovered months later, attributed to exposure in a remote desert location. No investigation suggested anything suspicious. That success, as Jennifer described it in her journal, convinced her that the synod could offer something meaningful, agency over one's own ending. She became more selective about membership, focusing on identifying individuals who seemed genuinely committed to the philosophy. She recruited facilitators, people like David Holmes, to coordinate ceremonies while she remained hidden behind the Helios persona. The March 2017 ceremony wasn't the first. Jennifer's journal documented 6 previous events between 2014 and 2016 involving a total of 13 people. All occurred in remote desert locations. All deaths were attributed to misadventure or natural causes. None triggered serious investigation because the participants had meticulously concealed their intentions from family members, and their bodies were discovered in contexts that suggested hiking accidents or heat-related tragedies. Emily Carter, Jason Lee, Marcus Riley, and Sarah Collins were participants in the 7th ceremony. According to Jennifer's notes, David Holmes had identified them through online forum activity, assessed their psychological readiness, and gradually introduced them to deeper synod materials. They'd agreed to participate, understanding the outcome, viewing it as liberation rather than death. But Rachel Carter wasn't satisfied with that narrative. She attended Jennifer Marsh's detention hearing, sitting in the gallery with clenched fists as the charges were read. 4 counts of manslaughter, conspiracy to conceal deaths, operating an organization that facilitated suicide, fraud, and multiple lesser charges. When given the opportunity to speak, Rachel stood. "My sister was manipulated. She was vulnerable, and this woman exploited that vulnerability by dressing up death as enlightenment. Emily didn't want to die. She wanted her life to mean something. There's a difference." Jennifer Marsh, seated at the defense table, turned to look at Rachel. Their eyes met. Jennifer's expression wasn't hostile or cold. It was something worse, sympathetic. As if she genuinely believed she'd helped Emily. As if she saw Rachel's grief as a failure to understand. "Your sister found peace," Jennifer said quietly before her attorney could stop her. "She told me herself. The week before the ceremony, we spoke for 2 hours. She said she'd never felt more certain about anything. She thanked me for helping her find a way forward." "Forward meant dying in a desert," Rachel replied, her voice shaking. "That's not peace, that's tragedy." The trial began in March 2025. The prosecution presented evidence of systematic manipulation. Carefully designed recruitment strategies, psychological conditioning, deliberate isolation from external support systems. Expert witnesses testified about coercive control in high-commitment ideological groups. Family members described how their loved ones had changed in the months before their deaths, becoming secretive and distant. The defense argued that the participants were adults capable of making their own choices. They'd signed documents acknowledging their understanding of the ceremonies. They'd voluntarily consumed substances knowing the effects. They'd explicitly requested Jennifer's facilitation. Prosecuting her for honoring those requests, the defense claimed, criminalized compassion and autonomy. David Holmes testified, granted limited immunity in exchange for cooperation. He described his role as ceremonial facilitator, maintaining that he'd carefully ensured every participant understood what would occur. He admitted to burying the phones, programming the delayed messages, and staging his own death to avoid investigation. But he insisted that Emily, Jason, Marcus, and Sarah had died by their own choice. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor pressed him on preparation methods. You gave them materials describing the ceremony as transcendence, passage to eternal consciousness, liberation from material suffering. Did you ever use the word death? We used more accurate terminology, David replied. Yes or no? Did you ever tell Emily Carter that she would die if she drank from that cup? I told her she would transition. Did you tell Jason Lee he would stop breathing? I told him his consciousness would expand beyond biological limitation. Did you tell Marcus Riley and Sarah Collins that their bodies would be found in a ravine, that their families would grieve, that their lives would end? David hesitated. I told them their material forms would be released. The word is imprecise, David insisted. It carries connotations that don't reflect. It carries the connotation of reality, the prosecutor interrupted. 4 people are dead, not transcended, not transitioned, dead. And you helped kill them while pretending you were doing something else. The jury deliberated for 6 days. They convicted Jennifer Marsh on 3 counts of manslaughter, 1 for each death where prosecution could prove she'd directly coordinated the ceremony. The jury couldn't reach consensus on Sarah Collins' death due to evidence suggesting Sarah had initiated contact with the Synod rather than being recruited. Jennifer was acquitted on several lesser charges but convicted on concealment and fraud counts. Sentencing occurred in May 2025. The judge imposed 25 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 17. David Holmes received 15 years for his role as facilitator and for concealing the deaths. Jennifer Marsh showed no emotion as the sentence was read. When asked if she wished to address the court, she stood and spoke clearly. I helped people who asked for help. I provided guidance to those seeking a path. I don't expect you to understand because you see death as the enemy. But some people see death as the doorway, and they have the right to walk through it on their own terms. Rachel Carter attended every day of the trial. After sentencing, she stood outside the federal courthouse in Las Vegas, surrounded by reporters asking for her reaction. My sister is still gone, Rachel said. That woman will eventually be released from prison, but Emily will still be gone. Jason Lee will still be gone. Marcus Riley and Sarah Collins will still be gone. There's no justice that brings them back. She paused, collecting herself. But maybe this stops the next person. Maybe someone searching for meaning online will see this story and recognize the warning signs. Maybe someone will choose therapy instead of a cult. Maybe someone will choose to live. The Synod's online infrastructure was permanently dismantled. Federal authorities identified 47 members across 11 states, most of whom had no knowledge of the ceremonies and faced no charges. 12 individuals who'd participated in preparatory gatherings similar to the March 2017 event were interviewed extensively. Several expressed shock at learning what the ceremonies actually entailed. Others maintained that they'd understood and still considered it a valid philosophical choice. The question of consent remained unresolved. Legal scholars debated whether Jennifer Marsh's operation constituted murder, assisted suicide, or something without clear precedent in American law. The case prompted discussions about autonomy, vulnerability, and where society should draw lines between respecting individual choice and protecting people from exploitation. Patricia Monroe and Gerald Voss, the compound caretakers, were not charged. They cooperated fully with investigators and provided testimony about the property's operations. The compound itself was seized as proceeds of crime and eventually sold at auction. The 5 phones that sent automated messages for 7 years were permanently deactivated. The GPS coordinates they'd transmitted formed no meaningful pattern. Jennifer had randomized them simply to maintain mystique and keep investigators occupied. The final message, sent in October 2023, had been programmed years earlier. There was no deeper significance, no hidden map, no buried secrets, just automated signals perpetuating a fiction. Detective Veranos, now fully retired, reflected on the case during an interview in late 2025. "I've worked desert missing persons for 15 years. I've seen people die from exposure, from getting lost, from accidents. This was different. These people weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were going. They walked into that desert with intention. The tragedy isn't that they were deceived. The tragedy is that they weren't. They really believed it. They really chose it." He paused, staring out his office window at the distant mountains. "That's what haunts me. Not that someone forced them, but that someone convinced them. That's harder to fight than a knife or a gun. You can't protect people from ideas." Emily was smart, Rachel tells audiences. She wasn't naive or gullible. She was hurting and searching, and someone offered her an answer that sounded beautiful. That's the danger. These groups don't look dangerous. They look like the solution to your pain. The 12 individuals detained during the May 2024 Nevada operation all survived because law enforcement intervened before the ceremony commenced. 2 of them later thanked investigators publicly. 3 maintained they were wrongly prevented from exercising their autonomy. 7 declined to comment publicly but accepted referrals to mental health services. One question remains unanswered. The shadow in Sarah Collins' video, the 6th person present at the March 2017 ceremony. Jennifer Marsh insists she wasn't there. David Holmes maintains he worked alone. Forensic analysis of the video can't definitively prove a 6th person existed. The shadow could be a trick of light and camera angle. But Detective Veranos doesn't believe that. Neither does Rachel Carter. Somewhere, they believe, is someone who witnessed that ceremony firsthand. Someone who helped bury the phones. Someone who might still be coordinating with remaining Senate members who weren't caught in the federal operation. The FBI investigation remains technically open. Agents continue monitoring online spaces where similar philosophies circulate. They've developed algorithms to identify recruitment patterns, language markers, and behavioral indicators associated with high-risk groups. But the internet is vast, and people seeking answers to existential questions will always find those willing to provide them. Rachel reads the comments occasionally. Most she ignores. But once, someone posted a simple question that she's never been able to answer. If your sister knew the outcome and still chose to go, was it really wrong to let her? Rachel typed a response and then deleted it. Typed another and deleted that too. Finally, she closed the app. Some questions don't have answers that fit into comment sections or courtroom arguments or neat philosophical frameworks. Emily Carter was 29 years old when she died in the Mojave Desert. She'd wanted her life to mean more. She'd been searching for purpose, for transcendence, for something beyond the ordinary frustrations of freelance design work and failed relationships. Someone convinced her that death was the path to finding it. Jennifer Marsh is incarcerated at FMC Carswell in Texas, a federal medical center for female inmates. She's maintained contact with a small group of supporters who believe her prosecution was unjust. She's written extensively about her philosophy, attempting to publish it through prison educational programs. Most institutions have declined. David Holmes is serving his sentence at a federal facility in California. He's declined all interview requests from journalists and researchers. According to prison records, he spends most of his time in the library and has expressed no remorse for his actions. The Mojave Desert continues as it always has, indifferent to the human dramas played out across its surface. The ravine where 4 people were discovered in March 2017 looks no different than 1,000 other ravines. The locations where phones were buried have been reclaimed by wind and sand. There are no markers, no memorials, no indication that anything significant occurred there. Just empty desert, stretching toward distant horizons, holding its secrets beneath indifferent sun.